On an early April morning in 2004, two boys in Washington State were the first to arrive on the scene of one of the largest mass whale beachings in United States history. Before reporting the find, they spent time wandering among the washed-up whales. One of the boys had a camera phone. With it, he filmed the site of the mass stranding and noticed something else. Something he thought looked strange. Something that didn't look like the other whales. What the boys claimed to have seen would be described differently in official reports, and the footage they shot that day would not be made public until now. The beaching the boys reported numbered nearly 50 whales of different species. Sperm whales, northern right whales, and humpback whales, along with a dozen common dolphins that had stranded on Moclips Beach in Washington State. A marine research team from NOAA Fisheries Department based in Seattle was quickly on the scene to investigate the cause of the mass beaching. Heading the research was respected marine biologist Dr. Brian McCormick. In 1999, McCormick had published a landmark study that linked mass whale beachings to experimental Navy sonar weapons testing. It led to the program's suspension in 2000. Dr. McCormick and his team suspected that the Navy had begun operating their sonar once more. Now, two members of that team have agreed to speak on camera for the first time about what they claim the Navy discovered, but has never disclosed.
I remember looking out over the dunes, and the scale was incredible. I'd never seen anything like it. My name's Paul Robertson. I was a research assistant with Dr. McCormick, working at NOAA for several years by then. By the time we got there, the wind was so bad that it had driven everyone else off the beach, and a storm was coming in, so it was just us and the Navy. And they'd cordoned off a section of beach, and there were guys in hazmat suits. It could have been biologists or medical staff, we weren't sure, but that got our attention.
Brian was one of the first scientists to draw the connection between the beachings and Navy sonar use. I'm Rebecca Davis. I was a field biologist at NOAA, working in the Marine Mammal Division, before I joined Dr. McCormick's lab back in early 1999. Blood was visible coming from the ears of the whales. We had never seen that before, where every single whale was bleeding from the ears. That meant they all suffered some kind of trauma. What that was, we could only determine after we examined the organ tissue.
We packed up as quickly as we could. I wanted to get the heck out of there. It was like getting sandblasted. But Brian wouldn't leave. He wanted to get as many samples as he could because he wanted to know what the Navy was doing out there. The Navy eventually started packing up, and we assumed it was because of the storm. After the Navy left, we went down to where they'd been working, and none of the animals had been cut open. They hadn't been autopsied. We had no idea what they would be doing down there.
In prior beachings where the Navy was implicated, the NOAA team found whales that had died from suffocation injuries. It is believed that loud sound of the Navy's sonar scared the whales into the shallows, where they stranded themselves. Without water to support their massive weight, the whales' internal organs collapsed, slowly suffocating them. That's what the NOAA team expected to find in these autopsy remains, signs of internal organ collapse. They found something else instead.
When we looked at the internal organs in the tissue samples, we saw that the organs hadn't collapsed. They were obliterated. Tiny circular lesions had formed in the tissues. Slide after slide, we were seeing the same lesions in every sample. We had never seen a beaching where every single whale had this kind of trauma. Those slides were evidence of catastrophic impact injury. Impact injury caused by what we believed was a new kind of Navy sonar. A sonar blast that now does more than just scare whales. It kills them.
Well, Brian realized that we didn't need the tissue to test our theory, that we had the hydrophone arrays. NOAA has these arrays on deep-sea buoys that record audio, marine life, seismic activity. And there was one of these buoys was very close by. So we know it was likely that we had recorded the whole event. The sonar blast, the whale reactions, everything. Well, first there was the sound of the whale vocalizations, which we expected. And then there was what we now understand to be the priming of the sonar weapon. And then there was a moment of silence, and this proved to be the calm before the storm, because then it was bam. And it was pretty awful to listen to. It had to be the Navy. I mean, it could only be the Navy. Brian was so preoccupied with cataloging this sonic blast that he almost missed what else was there. There was another sound on the recording, an animal call, and we realized that this was a bloop signature, the same creature that NOAA had recorded back in 1997. But in this case, our recording was much longer and had a lot more to analyze. It was the most complex, intricate animal call I had ever heard, and we had no idea what it made the sound.
In the months following the stranding in Washington state, the NOAA team responded to a sharp increase in mass beachings along both American coasts. Similar mass beaching events were being reported all over the globe.
Rescuers are racing against the clock, trying to save nearly 200 pilot whales that beached themselves in southern Australia Monday.
这条长9.7米的抹香鲸，体重超过5吨，年龄在2到3岁，雄性。
6 bottlenose dolphins also beached themselves, something scientists say is very uncommon. This is the 4th incident of its kind in recent months in the same part of southern Australia, and scientists really don't know why it's happening.
This was happening all over the world, so now we're following beachings elsewhere. We alerted marine agencies to what we discovered with the sonar blasts. And we begin hearing about other things. Reports of bodies washing up with the whales. Rumors of something else washing up with them. And in every case, there was always authorities on hand to control the scene. But at the time, we just wanted to stop the beachings from ever happening again.
In some of these events, not only were there reports of bodies being found, but something else. NOAA had been tracking this mystery for years. Fish caught in the open ocean with spears in them. Now they were being found washed ashore with the whales. In NOAA's archives is an interview with a German fisherman who had his own experience with this strange phenomenon.
My name is Hans Bauer. My name is Hans Bauer. I grew up in the fishing port of Sassnitz. I've worked my whole life as a fisherman. In the 1970s, I surfed in a boat out of Bremerhaven. We were a trawler, fishing mostly for cod and pollock in the Baltic. I'd heard the stories growing up of the strange things found in fish caught in the mid-Baltic. But it was when we'd trawl the deep water of the Bornholm Basin that I saw them for myself. Sometimes when we'd pull our nets in, we'd find them. Fish just killed. Fish with spears in their sides. I saw these a few times in my life. Then, on one trip, I brought my camera. I was going to take pictures of the whales we'd see to show my little boy. It was on this trip that we hauled in our nets and saw something. Something climbing out of the nets as we pulled them in. I ran for my camera and got a shot of it. I think this is what was making the spears. I think we were disturbing somebody else's fishing.
We petitioned the Department of Defense for information, and we sought injunctions against the Navy, but it didn't get us anywhere. The Navy claimed that they were merely studying the anomalies, that they weren't the cause of them. We continued to build profiles of these events, and we went over the one thing we did have, which was the recording. We listened to and analyzed this recording I don't know how many times, and we made comparisons with whales and dolphins. Dolphins have an incredibly elaborate repertoire of sounds. Humpback whales have songs so complex that they even have rhyme. But this thing, to our ears, sounded much more intricate, much more advanced. There was more material. There was more to study on this recording than the original. And we thought we had a reasonable chance to crack the code, but it was still beyond us. We needed help.
My name is Dr. Rodney Webster. I'm currently at the University of South Florida. I specialize in animal communications. I focus mainly on the field of cetacean vocalizations, dolphins and whales. A lot of what I do in my work is I search for signifiers, which are, particular sounds to which you can attach a meaning or a mood. You and I would refer to them as words. So they're words for dolphins. Over the past several decades, we have assembled over 600 signifiers for whales, and with dolphins, we're just starting to scratch the surface. Over this entire time, however, we have not established any kind of significant patterning that could be understood to be a language. What's so interesting about the 2004 recording is that I could identify literally hundreds of signifiers and arrange these into recognizable patterns. We had not gathered this kind of information in the previous 30 years of studying dolphins and whales.
But that wasn't all that Dr. Webster found in the recording.
I noticed that there were some pitch changes in the bloop at certain parts of the recording, so I ran a spectrogram analysis of the data, and in the frequencies that were above the range of human hearing, and this is what I found. This is it at original speed, with the whale sounds removed. I then slowed the recording down into the range of human hearing. Here it is at 1/3 of its original speed. That's what you get. Multiple individuals, literally thousands of different signifiers, at least half dozen individual voice prints. So what you see here is language. They're talking to one another.
At the time, the greater complexity revealed in the 2004 bloop recording did not lead to new theories from the NOAA team about its origins. But now Dr. Robertson believes that it should have led them to an old theory, a theory about human origins.
It's a theory about us, really, about where we come from. And I know it's always been controversial, but now I think there's really something to it.
The sound on the recording may have its origins far from the North Pacific, echoing back deep in time and across the other side of the world. The descent from the trees, rising up on two legs, the story of the rise of humankind. But where did we rise? Was it the savannah, or was it the sea? Some scientists believe our ancestors left the forest for the sea. They believe this is where our ability to walk fully upright first evolved, wading in the shallows where food was easily found. The trees had been our cradle, but now we would be shaped by the sea. Over time, more human ancestors collected along the coast. It is even thought that this is where our advanced intelligence began to develop. Brain-building nutrients like iodine and fatty acids were abundant in the crustaceans and shellfish that could be gathered here. A time of plenty and a time of peril. Earthquakes, volcanic activity along the coast, a coast which would soon be flooded over by a rising sea. Some of our ancestors pulled back, heading inland. Others did not. The ability to walk upright on two legs, and a highly developed brain that depends on nutrients found in the sea. These traits and others are claimed in support of a theory of human evolution called the aquatic ape theory. It suggests the striking differences between humans and most other land animals stem from a time when our distant ancestors lived at least a part of their lives in the sea. We can control our breathing at will, like marine mammals, and we can hold our breath longer than any other terrestrial animal. Trained free divers can stay down nearly 20 minutes, almost as long as a dolphin. Evidence of our aquatic past is still a part of our present. Human babies instinctively hold their breath when immersed in water. Unlike nearly every other land animal, we are practically hairless. Hair creates drag in water. And just like other marine mammals, we are born with insulating fat distributed throughout our bodies. This keeps us warm in water. The transition from land to sea has happened before. Whales, like these orcas, evolved from a wolf-like ancestor millions of years ago. And there are animals where this change is even more recent. Only 150,000 years ago, a group of brown bears split from the rest of their line. They would evolve into a new species, polar bears. In this relatively short span, polar bears have grown capable of holding their breath for minutes underwater and developed webbing in their front paws to help them swim. An adaptation unique among all bears. They are becoming a marine mammal. If our distant ancestors spent time living in the sea, is it possible that one group split off from the rest? And rather than retreating from the water, did they go deeper in?
We detailed every stranding that followed the Washington State event, trying to establish a pattern of naval involvement.
If we could prove that this was a new species being affected, we figured that this might give us leverage, that we could compel the Navy to divulge what they're doing and possibly stop it. We had strong circumstantial evidence, but we would need more, and that's what the South African beaching gave us. What made this beaching stand out was that our South African colleagues had made a recording of their own.
Well, we of course had heard of the work of Dr. McCormick. We'd heard the reports linking large-scale beachings to sonic events, and we'd also heard the rumors that such an event may have affected a species as yet unidentified to science. And of course we'd heard of the bloop recording. My name is Dr. Gavin Dittmar. I am the head of acoustic research at the Marine Biology Research Center at the University of Cape Town. We had an underwater array just about a kilometer off the tip of Cape Town, and this was part of a research program to monitor whale populations at certain times of the year. That's why we contacted Dr. McCormick. We now believed that we had found the same thing.
When we heard that recording, we immediately accepted an invitation to make a research visit. We arrived about 40 hours after the event. And again, we weren't the first. Other official investigators had already come and gone.
The South African beaching was the biggest since the Washington State event. And here again were the exact same patterns of sonic trauma.
What was different in South Africa was the recording itself. Here we had another bloop signature, the same mystery creature that we had recorded. We had the same low-frequency sonic blast. But here, it was what happened before the blast that was revealing. Here was a bloop call similar to the one we recorded. It was obviously the same kind of creature. And this time, there was dolphin chatter on the recording. Not surprising, dolphins are in these waters and they get stranded in these events as well. But here there was communication, back and forth communication between our bloop creatures and the dolphins, which made us think, is it a dolphin? Is it some new species of dolphin? And from that point on, that's what we thought we were looking for.
Again, we petitioned the Navy. We made inquiries of the South African government to see if they were doing joint exercises with the United States Navy. And again, nothing. We were almost finished in South Africa. We'd confirmed this stranding was due to a sonic blast, and we now had 2 of these events on tape. We thought this new evidence would finally compel a hearing about what was happening. But then Dr. Dittmar wanted us to confirm something else.
One of the Coast Guard guys rang it in. Thought it would be of interest to our department. It got caught in one of the nets here at Fishhook. My guess that it came to feed on the whale carcasses after the stranding.
It's the great white shark.
It's not the shark. It's what's in the shark.
It was a mess, and it smelled pretty terrible. There were parts that looked like they might have been from a dolphin, parts that looked like they're from a seal, but no seal or dolphin we'd ever encountered. And there were other body parts too. We had no idea what we were looking at, but we thought right away, jackpot. This was something new. This was a new species. There were puncture marks around the shark's gills and mouth, and I initially thought these might have been injuries sustained when it was gaffed to the side of the boat. But I probed one of them, and I found a stingray barb inside. Now, this could have come from a stingray defending itself. Sharks eat stingrays. Hammerheads do, tigers do. But not great whites. So I kept the barb. I thought it might be something I could publish in a journal or something. I just thought it was interesting.
A million years after entering the water, the aquatic apes would have radiated out along the length of the African coast. Like seals, their hair is now short and streamlined, and they can hold their breath for minutes at a time as they forage on nearshore reefs. They haven't severed all ties to land. They still go ashore to sleep and to find sticks they use to probe for fish hiding in the corals. But they are increasingly at home in this new world. As they venture into deeper waters, they are alert to new dangers. they have found an ally with a common enemy. Reports of a U.S. Navy presence at a string of mass beachings around the world led many scientists to conclude that the Navy had restarted its deep-sea sonar testing. It is a charge supported by testimony from individuals who claim to have been involved in the program.
I was part of a team that designed the first weaponized sound devices used by the Navy. The goal was to develop a long-range weapon that neutralized a target underwater.
What the Navy had developed was an underwater resonator, a device that could generate tremendous blasts of low-frequency sonic energy. Designed to penetrate pressure hulls of submarines nearly a mile away, the damage it would inflict on an enemy crew is described exactly like what NOAA investigators found in the bodies of beached whales.
Basically, it would rattle their internal organs so violently it would cripple them.
However, the Navy soon began experiencing problems with the devices.
Not long after the initial field testing, the Navy started sending the devices back. They were being damaged in the field. I mean, this seemed impossible. Because the way the resonators work is that a dozen of them is strung out on a long cable line, hundreds of feet deep. They're in sealed, waterproof housings, able to withstand intense pressure. So how could they be damaged? When we looked at the return units, we saw that the external housings had been tampered with. Something had physically pulled them off. I mean, none of us knew what to think. What the Navy was requesting, what we were being asked to do, was to proof the devices against something that was physically pulling them apart. Something that was pulling them apart in the middle of the ocean.
We got the body back to the lab, and the condition of the remains was poor. We estimated we recovered about 30% of the body, so we know going in that it was going to be difficult to piece together.
First of all, we took DNA samples to try and establish the genetic makeup of the creature.
So now the question is, what kind of marine mammal is this? Is this our strange dolphin, the dolphin from the recording? We started our preliminary analysis, and we started by looking at the rib cage, or what was left of it, and it appeared to be hinged. A collapsible rib cage is a feature of marine mammals who have evolved to dive.
The teeth were a total mystery. You would expect a marine mammal to be homodont. That means having teeth that are all the same size and shape. But not this specimen. It had molars, incisors, canines, omnivore teeth. There are no marine mammals that are omnivores.
Of all the pieces we had, the tail fluke was the best preserved. And it looked a lot like a manatee's. And there was, at one time, a cold water species of manatee that lived along the Pacific coast, but they were hunted to extinction. We wondered if maybe that's what this could be, some relic population or undiscovered relative of this animal. We took an X-ray. There were bones in the tail fluke. Manatees don't have that. None of the whales have bones in their tail flukes. So we're thinking, what on earth is this?
And then there was the skull. More than half of it was missing. And there was a hole in the partial forehead plate, right above the eyes. I thought it might be a blowhole, but it didn't look like any others I'd ever seen in dolphins.
The skull was crushed beyond the team's ability to reconstruct it. They made resin casts to send out to a forensic expert in the hope of reconstructing the creature's appearance based on the skull fragments.
So then we looked at the pelvis. There were remains of leg bones. Seals have leg bones, but their femurs, their thigh bones are short. We could tell that even from the sections that were missing, that the ones in our specimen were long. So basically, after all this analysis, we'd come up snake eyes against an entire known inventory of marine mammals. This thing is not a seal, it's not a manatee, and although it talks to dolphins, it's not a dolphin, at least not from what we were seeing.
After millions of years, the aquatic apes that once clung to nearshore reefs now range far out to sea. Streamlined bodies, flippers where there were feet, fins on their backs. They have evolved. Like seals, they return to land only to bask and to give birth. But they are not alone here. What began as an alliance against a shared enemy is now a bond of friendship and a shared love of play. Descendants of a creature that once slept in trees now swim through them. And in time their transition would be complete. They would leave land behind forever. Like the dolphins they had befriended, they would now belong to the sea.
Brian and I tried to make sense of the rest of the parts. We had found a bone that was probably a whale bone. It wasn't part of this animal, possibly part of a rib. It had markings along it, and at the top it had a little notch carved out. And we had no idea what to make of this. Clearly this had been worked on, and we set it aside, thinking we'd send it out for further study.
I started working on the phalanges. These are the bones that support the fin or flipper structure of a seal or dolphin. Dolphins have them in their pectoral fins. Seals have phalanges in their front and hind flippers. I kept trying to configure the bones of this animal to try and serve a structure like one of those other animals. But I couldn't get any of the arrangements to work.
We started analyzing deeper tissue layers. First we looked at the blubber, and after a few test procedures we analyzed the blubber content, and we found that it had a very unique fatty acid which could remain liquid and insulating in extremely cold water, and we had never seen anything like that before.
The team discovered a blood protein called myoglobin that stores oxygen in the muscles, and a network of blood vessels that retained heat in the critical organ systems. Both are adaptations found in marine mammals.
We found something else. This animal had been affected by the naval sonar. The tissue was just like the whales, and regardless of what else might have happened with the shark, this animal had been impacted by the sonar as well.
The NOAA team was now certain the Navy was not only affecting whales with their tests, they were also affecting a new species. The creature's physiology gave deeper insights into its behavior. Although it was damaged in the shark attack, they discovered a large spleen, another trait of deep-diving marine mammals.
Large spleens are common features to marine mammals. It's used as a reservoir for oxygenated blood, and it stores oxygen during deep dives. It's like having a built-in scuba tank inside them.
The creatures are now fully marine mammals. They've shed their hair like dolphins, and pigment adaptations have changed their color, blending them into their blue world. Their bodies are built to withstand the crushing pressure of the deep. A hinged rib cage designed to collapse protects the lungs and chest cavity as it descends. They've retained a skull ridge, a legacy of their primate ancestors that now helps them cut through the water. They can stay submerged for nearly an hour on a single breath, putting them in the same class as the deepest diving marine mammals, long enough to go hundreds of meters down to hunt in the twilight layer.
Every time we found something new, a dozen more questions would pop up about what we had found, about what it meant. Dr. McCormick invited someone else to take a look. The South Africans were taking so long getting the permitting to get the material out of the country that Bryant flew him in. He was someone from the Smithsonian whose work he knew.
My specialty is in biomechanics, how animals have adapted different means of locomotion. My name is Dr. Stephen Pearsall. When I was asked by Dr. McCormick to come in and analyze the remains of this creature, I knew obviously this is an intriguing find. But when I got there, I thought, well, what the heck am I doing here? Because this is clearly a marine mammal. That's what you guys do. The tail looked like the tail on an animal that you find in the ocean. And it was only when we got the remains under the scanners that I realized that this was like no tail we had ever seen before.
Looking at the hip structure, Dr. Pearsall recognizes something strikingly familiar.
That's what really blew me away. Because with humans, if you look at the top of your hips here, they have this high ridge. And these are called the iliac crests, and they're designed to support weight. They support the internal organs. They're load-bearing. What confused me was that I looked at this creature, and it had similar crests on its hips, and that didn't make any sense until I realized that we were looking at the scans the wrong way. We were looking at them this way, when in fact what we had to do is rotate them this way. And then that is when it became clear that this creature had a hip structure that was the same as an upright animal. This creature once walked on 2 legs. And there is only one animal that walks upright on 2 legs, that walks on 2 feet.
After trying so many arrangements that were still at least loosely based on known forms, it finally hit me. There was one form I hadn't tried. Not fins, not flippers, hands.
Becky's discovery that this creature had hands, the discovery that this creature once walked upright on land, like us because it was one of us, that changed everything. It would change the way we interpreted this creature. It would change the way we interpret the world. That bone had been worked on. It had been carved by hand. At the top, where the notch was, that was meant to hold something, and we found fibrous plant material wrapped around it, which would have been designed to hold it in place. And then I remembered. At the port, I examined the puncture wounds in the shark, and I found something that I didn't understand the significance of at the time, the stingray bar. This thing fit perfectly in the top of the bone. This was a fashion bone. This was a tool. All those tales of fish found with spears in them, all the fishermen's stories of spears found in the open ocean, this is what made them. Not only do we have something descended from our line, we have something that makes tools. This thing has figured out how to disarm a stingray, use its spine to kill fish. And if this is the same animal on the recordings, it has language. This is no longer what animal we're dealing with. We're now asking much bigger questions. If this creature is part of the human family tree, how human is it? Does it have a social capacity? We know it travels in groups. Does it have emotion? Does it have empathy? How human is this creature?
Land, covered in glaciers, the creatures no longer return to shore, not even to give birth. Land must seem a cold and foreign place to them now. A lone scout swims ahead of his pod before the pod makes an open water crossing. The drop-offs that chasm down into dark water are feeding grounds. Whales gather here. And so does the shark that preys on them. Megalodon, a shark as big as a whale. A shark that ate whales. 1.5 million years ago, these creatures would have confronted the greatest monster to ever rule the seas. A monster that knows they travel in groups. The pod approaches the drop-off. They travel with young, the slow and the vulnerable. They must be warned. They don't see it, but it sees them. Just as it hunts the whales, the great shark will attack the pod from below. But the shark can be distracted, drawn to the slow and the most vulnerable. This is who the shark will target.
The body was one of the most important anthropological finds, possibly one of the most important scientific discoveries in human history. The very definition of human history would have to be redefined. This was an intelligent toolmaker with grasping hands, evolved from a primate ancestor, one that walked upright on land like us, a member of our own family tree. The question is, how closely did those branches touch?
But the question they were about to answer was even more basic. What did it really look like?
I remember on the drive out to see the complete skull mold, I remember thinking how poetically perfect it was. Here we were driving through some of the very land where our oldest ancestors had been discovered. And now we were about to meet a new one. Only this wasn't an ancestor. This was somebody still out there.
My name is Dr. Leanne Visser. I'm a forensic anthropologist in the Department of Human Evolution at the Witwatersrand University in South Africa. I mostly work on early human fossils, although I sometimes work on contemporary cases of criminal investigations. I reconstruct the appearance of an individual based on fragments of skull and other bones. I was asked to work on this reconstruction because the team that made the discovery needed help identifying what they believed to be a new species of hominid. These are humans and our closest relatives. But then they dropped a bombshell. This wasn't a fossil find. This was a contemporary find. A few characteristics immediately stood out. The skull had very large orbits, bigger than any fossil or modern human that I'd ever reconstructed. The eyes would be quite big, and large eyes are found in animals operating in low light. Nocturnal animals have them, and some marine animals have them. So this was interesting. The next thing I noticed was evidence of a skull ridge. Such skull crests are found in some of our relatives, but not in modern humans. Apes have them, and they're also found in some of our early ancestors.
Scanning the reconstructed skull enabled Dr. Visser to map the inside of the brain cavity, and from that, deduce the size and shape of the component parts of the brain. She discovered that the parts which in humans correspond to sound interpretation were greatly enlarged. This suggested how important the sense of sound was to this creature. The scan also offered the team another structural clue.
The opening on the frontal skull fragment was connected to an extensive series of sinus cavities inside the skull. The shape and the features of the skull revealed just how elaborate this creature's acoustic capacities really were.
The concave shape in the front of the skull indicated that it had a melon. A melon is a specialized mass of fatty tissue that enables dolphins and other whales to echolocate, which means this creature could broadcast and receive an incredible range of sound. It wasn't a blowhole. This wasn't used for breathing. It was used to channel sound. The skull reconstruction proved it could do this, that this creature could echolocate. Now we were certain. this was the creature that had made the sound. It could have produced the calls on the recording. The calls that had never been identified. Well, now they were.
Echolocation, a form of biosonar. The ability to emit high-frequency sounds that bounce off objects and give the animal a mental map of the environment. Sound used to locate food. Sound used to communicate in the deep blue of the vast ocean. To call others of its own kind. And to talk with kindred spirits.
We now had no doubt that this was the animal that had made the bloop. This was the same animal that was on the 1997 bloop recording. This was the same animal that was on the 2004 Washington State recording, and it was the same animal that was on the South African recording, the one that talked to the dolphins.
The creatures and the dolphins call to one another. Call one another to the hunt. The sardine run. Almost every predator in the ocean will converge on a miles-long caravan of migrating fish. But only two work together. Shared tactics and tool use ensure both will get their fill. They corral the schooling fish and take turns rushing through the bait ball. The sardines are encircled and ensnared. Every member of the pod takes part in gathering up the fish before heading back to the shallows with the dolphins, where together they share in the spoils.
We are such a lonely species, wondering what else is out there. And now we were staring in the face of another intelligence. Another creature like us.
We had just found a creature of fable. I mean, that's what we were looking at. All of us had been wanting to say it for days, probably weeks. But scientists aren't supposed to believe in fairy tales. And what we were looking at was a mermaid. So I asked myself, how could this thing stay hidden so long? Then you realize that the surface of the moon has been explored more than the deep oceans. And you look at the fact that even to this day, there are still large animals being discovered. There have been 2 new species of whales discovered in just the past decade. These are 30-foot, 40-foot long animals that have never been seen before, never been recorded. Giant animals found for the first time ever in just the past 10 years. So yeah, it's possible. It's still possible to stay hidden. But of course, this animal we found had been recorded before. We have no record. We have no scientific record of them, but there's another record. We know them. We've known them all along.
The accounts have been told by sailors the world over. The seafaring Greeks described them, as did the Vikings. as did the Chinese during their great period of maritime exploration. Cultures that had no contact with one another, yet all reported seeing the same mythical creature. Sightings slowed in the Old World, but then came again in the New World. They were recorded in the ship's logs of the voyages of both Christopher Columbus and Henry Hudson. Even as late as the 19th century, captains of the whaling vessels reported seeing them swimming with pods of whales. Even today, accounts still emerge in the form of hastily shot footage showing a strange creature filmed far out in the open ocean. These most recent sightings come from deep-sea fishermen. The most ancient can be found in a desert left behind by a departed sea. These sandstone caves once looked out over a tidal bay some 30,000 years ago. The water has receded, but the memory of the people who lived there remains, recorded in ancient paintings that cover the cave walls. Archaeologists believe these may be among the oldest mythic images ever made by man. Are they the projected dreams of early fishermen, imagining themselves with tails, swimming out to catch fish with spears and nets? Or are they something else? Early humans fought savagely over hunting and fishing grounds. Force was used against rival tribes and against any other competitive threat to a valuable food source. Could that be what these paintings depict? Could these paintings be a record of mankind's conflict with creatures that are now relegated to myth? Did we drive them into extinction, or did we drive them into hiding? The creatures come to light in the descriptions of sailors. The accounts claim they were seen most often during the spring tides, swimming on the surface in dramatic displays.
We'd done everything we could in South Africa, and we'd prepared everything to go back to the States. Once again, the South Africans were being difficult about getting permits for sending materials out of the country. That should have warned us what was going to happen.
It's hard to remember it all now. It's hard to remember how excited we were. But the reason I've agreed to do this is because I think it'll help. Becky and I believe that. Brian, however, is a bit more cynical. I think he doesn't have that kind of faith. And I don't blame him, certainly not after what happened.
the hell's going on here? Where did you get this from?
I tried to restrain Brian. Then after that, I tried to pick him up for weeks, but he was just devastated. We all were.
The police confiscated everything. All the files. All the lab tests. The skull reconstruction we'd brought back. The body.
Well, I've certainly never seen anything like it before, and I've worked here for 20 years. This was unprecedented. This was not some normal police raid. This was a slick operation. They came early in the morning when they knew no one would be around. They had all the right documentation. Confiscation of a discovery of national importance. I mean, I've never heard of that before.
We knew who did it. I mean, we all know who is really behind it. The tests, the sonar tests. We prove this, and they have to stop the testing. They have to acknowledge that they have a sonar weapon.
All we had left, the only thing we had left that they hadn't seized, that they couldn't seize, were the recordings. They were all we had left. But they would prove to be everything.
The great whales migrate to warmer waters, to the birthing grounds of their kind, an age-old ritual, a journey of thousands of miles, a journey they do not undertake alone. A shallow coastal lagoon in the southern hemisphere, where the creatures retreat to warm, protected waters, where a species in decline still draws hope.
When we got back to the States, we were in shock. We couldn't stay in South Africa. We had our visas revoked. And when we got back to Washington, we lodged several protests with the American and South African governments. The South Africans eventually did respond. The DNA samples that they had confiscated from the university lab where they're being processed, they shared those with us.
Because the DNA readings were so close to human DNA, the lab that did the tests claimed that they had been contaminated with human DNA. They discredited the results.
The feeling was like something out of Orwell. This was Big Brother. They were rewriting history. basically writing this creature out of existence. And the question I asked myself is, why? Are they protecting their testing? Are they keeping the creatures for themselves? Are they testing the creatures? We don't know. Well, we still don't know. All we had now was time. We just kept poring over it. The beachings with reports of bodies washing up on shore, where local officials had closed off areas, and in some cases reportedly with the help of American officers in civilian clothes. We kept thinking back to the beaching that happened right here in Washington, that naval medical team. We had thought they were analyzing their tests on whales, but now we had a slightly different theory. We tracked down the kids that had made the original report, and the Navy had spent a lot of time with these kids. They had even visited them at home, and they had convinced the kids that what they had seen was actually a seal that had decomposed, and that's why it looked strange. The boy had drawn a picture of what he saw. Now, nobody outside of the scientists we worked with or the government officials that had confiscated our materials could have known what the skull reconstruction looked like. But this kid had a drawing of what he had seen, and it was a match. He'd seen the same thing. And that's not all we saw. The boy's mom agreed to show it to us. They hadn't shown it to anybody. The Navy had not thought to check the kid's camera phone. Now, that's not the first time the military's gotten caught by a camera phone, but back then, most people didn't even have them. I doubt the investigating officer even bothered to check it. This kid had kept it. He'd kept it all that time.
The mermaids travel with whales. They travel with a new member of their pod. It will be his first trip to the northern feeding grounds. Whales offer protection from orcas and open ocean sharks. And females with young can draft off them, conserving energy as they swim up the long length of the Pacific coast. As they swim through a stretch of water in the Pacific Northwest, where NOAA audio recordings suggest Navy ships were gathered.
Those reports of bodies washing up on beaches all over the world, we could pretty much make an educated guess as to what those were.
We needed more than the bloop recording and the camera phone footage. We needed something more concrete. We needed to find them.
Brian had us call up those locations of all the previous beachings again. He wanted to cross-reference those mass strandings where there were reports of either strange bodies or the Navy or both. And then he had us call up the dates. when were these happening? He wanted to know what time of year this all happened.
We knew they were washing up with the whales. What we found is that was happening along migratory routes.
They didn't just associate with the whales, they traveled with them. They migrated with them. Now we could predict where to find them based on where whales are at any given time of year. We were going to try to make contact. We found that the creatures were using established migration routes used by whales. And we went back to the migration data thinking we could figure out where to find them, where we might have a chance of intersecting a migrating pod. And now we had the means of contacting them. We had the South African recording. The plan was to broadcast the recording, the dialogue recording, out into the water. We knew it was some kind of call, and we hoped it would elicit a return call. We knew we were in the right vicinity when we saw the whales. And we started the recording, and we waited to see if there was anything out there. There was something out there. Brian was certain he saw something. And I'm pretty sure I saw something too. Our activities were being observed. I mean, this was Big Brother. And anything we would have recorded that day, we weren't going to be able to keep. We were not going to get the story out that way.
Brian was the first to leave the agency. Paul and I left NOAA not long after that.
Brian had become consumed, and he'll follow that call to the ends of the earth. And he may very well find them. I know he's still looking. After that day, for me, I'm not sure I can help. And I'm not even so sure we should try. I started thinking of them not as scientific curiosities, but as fellow beings. And the last time we lived alongside a fellow human species was Neanderthals. We displaced them. Some scientists think we actively hunted them, that we devoured their very existence. It's the same thing. Our own myths tell the same story. The history. What we did on land to one of our own, we'll do in the sea. We're not so good at coexistence. Sometimes other responsibilities supersede science. My only goal is that the Navy stop their sonar testing. That court inquiries open into their activities that then lead to court orders to stop it. That will safeguard the whales. And it'll safeguard them too. Mermaids have persisted only because they can hide. And I hope they stay that way. I hope they stay hidden. I don't want to hunt them anymore because they don't want to be found.
I was only asked to analyze the pelvic and leg section of the find. I never saw the rest of it. All I can tell you is that this was not the result of some strange bone disease or any deformity. What this creature was, I don't know. All I can tell you is that I know where it came from. There's absolutely no question in my mind about where it came from. The bones that we scanned were absolutely of hominid origin. This was a creature with which we shared a common ancestry. We're both descended from the same line.
Look, what I saw on the dock that day, I've never seen anything like that before in my life. I have spent my whole life by the sea. I've spent my life in study of the sea. And I've never seen a creature like that before. This was a creature that was new to science.
I play these recordings again and again in my mind. The first one from Washington State, the second one from South Africa. Trying to figure it out, and I can't. I don't know what they are. I don't know what they're saying. You know, I've never heard anything like it. The only creature with this level of linguistic complexity that I've heard is human beings. It's us.
Like I said before, making a reconstruction is like building a jigsaw. The pieces have to fit if the picture is going to make sense, biological sense. Even if one piece doesn't fit, the reconstruction, it doesn't work. In my opinion, the molds that were sent to me were taken from a genuine find. These were genuine molds. This was a real animal. Call it what you like.
Well, forget what we're claiming. Forget the recordings that remain. Forget the sworn affidavits from other scientists. And forget our own cultural references of mermaids. There is another culture that remembers them. Nature doesn't lie, so look to nature. There are a few places left on Earth where wild dolphins will hunt with fishermen. They'll actually help humans catch fish. This happens in Brazil, in coastal West Africa, in Southeast Asia. Fishermen go down to the edge of the water and into the shallows. They're calling them. they call in the dolphins, wild dolphins, from the sea. And the dolphins answer the call by driving in schools of fish toward shore. Then the fishermen encircle the fish schools and all the dolphins with their nets. The dolphins don't panic. They stay entirely calm. They know that the fishermen will let them out as they pull the nets tight. They let the dolphins out before they pull the fish ashore. And then the dolphins wait in the shallows, bobbing with anticipation in the water as the fishermen give them their share. They toss fish to the dolphins to eat. They divide the catch, essentially. Dolphins and people split the spoils. They share the fish they caught together. Cooperation between two animals of two different environments. There is nothing else like this on Earth, and nobody knows how it began, how this partnership started. It's one of the great mysteries of the oceans, how this partnership between people and dolphins evolved. How could people teach dolphins to do this? Well, we didn't. We didn't teach dolphins to do this, they taught us. And I think that they learned it from someone else. We are not the only culture with a memory of mermaids.